Good morning. Thank you for joining us for our webinar on the Emergency Solutions Grant CARES Act Round 2 Application Overview. We'll be referring to the Emergency Solutions Grant as ESG CV 2 throughout this webinar. I'm joined today by Stacy Hawthorne and Brendan Allman, who will be co-hosting with me. Just to start with some housekeeping, the webinar will last about 1 hour. All participants will remain muted throughout the webinar. We will have time for questions at the end, so please use the chat function to type in any questions you might have. And those that we might not have time for or aren't able to address during the session, we will be able to compile those answers and email to participants following the webinar. Please be aware that the session is being recorded and that by participating in the discussion, you are consenting to the recording, the storage, and possible distribution of this meeting by a government agency. At this time, I would like to ask if anyone objects to please state so now. And the recorded webinar will be available at PennsylvaniaCOC.org and also DCED's website, or the Department of Community and Economic Development. I'm sorry, I'll try not to use too many acronyms as we're going throughout. It'll be on our website. So if you'd like to view the recording after this, they'll be available at those two locations. So just to give a little bit of background, last year when the CARES Act was implemented, there was about $4 billion that was made available nationally for the Emergency Solutions Grant. And those funds are specifically used to prevent, prepare for, and respond to coronavirus among individuals and families who are homeless or receiving homeless assistance, and to support additional homeless assistance and homelessness prevention activities to mitigate the impacts created by COVID-19. DCED received a total of $39.8 million in ESG CARES Act funds, or as I said, what we'll call ESG CV. The first $19 million was allocated in July of last year in our round 1. And then we also allocated $2.9 million in ESG CV Code Blue funds last month that was funding to support winter sheltering through this season. There were 15 grantees that were awarded funding to provide emergency shelter, street outreach, and temporary emergency shelter through that Code Blue funding. So with that then, with ESG CV2 application that was just released this past Monday, so you can find the application on our website, the remaining ESG CV funds are $16.9 million that will be available through this application. Applications will be due on February 26th. The contracts will be 12-month contracts, and I want to point that out because that's a little that is different from what the length of our typical contracts. Just so that you know, the time frame that we have to spend the CARES Act funds is through September of 2022. And in order to give ourselves a little bit of a buffer, these contracts will be 12-month contracts. So keep that in mind when you're planning and submitting your application. HUD has also issued some pretty stringent expenditure deadlines that we must follow. And so for this funding, 15% must be expended by the end of this year, December 31st, 2021. Applications must be submitted through the electronic single application, or ESA. All of the required templates and addenda will be found in ESA. They aren't attached as templates to the application packet as they typically are. So please use and download any of the addenda that you find in ESA. Do not use former versions of the documents. We have made changes to many of the documents throughout the application. So please be sure that you're using the most recent version and are downloading directly from ESA so that you have the most recent version. As I mentioned, we have new questions on the management standards and the program design form. So we'll be expecting that all of those, that the questions are answered and you are answering the appropriate questions, especially throughout the program designs. They have changed. And we have also implemented a new program design form for HMIS activities. So if you intend on applying for HMIS funds, you will be required to submit a program design form for HMIS. And that HMIS is Homeless Management Information System. I can't state this enough. Please read the application guidelines before starting your application. We're going to cover a lot of the things that are different and may have changed from former application processes, but I strongly encourage you to read the application guidelines before starting your application so that you're aware and know how to proceed with your application. So just to cover who are eligible applicants. They are units of local government, such as cities, boroughs, townships, and counties. Nonprofits may apply if they are proposing a regional project, and that means that the nonprofit must serve more than one county and must encompass more than one county in their services that they're providing and projecting to serve. Now, new and different for ESG CV 2 is that public housing authorities and redevelopment authorities may apply directly to DCED for these funds. Priority is given to applicants within the Pennsylvania Balance of State continuum of care. Emergency Solution Grant Direct Entitlement communities, and those are communities that receive funding directly from HUD, are eligible applicants and may apply for all activities. And I just want to note that that is new and different for ESG CV 2. In the past, entitlements were limited to the activities that they could apply for, but in this round, they will be eligible to apply for all activities. The minimum request is $25,000. There is no maximum request, and there is no match required for the ESG CV funds. Public participation. Applicants must demonstrate public participation by announcing their activities and the amount they will be requesting electronically. You can do that either through social media or your website, and you just need to make sure that you have posted and announced your intent to apply and the activities and the amount that you're applying for. That must be posted and completed no less than 5 days before having the local governing body approve the application. And so what we'd be looking for here is that a resolution must be signed by your chief elected official or the director or president of your board of directors. And so what we'd be looking for is that the date of the resolution, whatever date is on your resolution, that you have posted 5 days prior to the date that is on your resolution. And I will turn it over to Brendan to present the next sections.
Good morning, everyone. Brendan Allman from DCED here. So I'm going to be covering some of the eligible activities and some of the descriptions and requirements behind them. So for ESG CV 2, all the typical ESG categories will be made available. So rapid rehousing, street outreach, homelessness prevention, emergency shelter, HMIS and admin costs. But we are including the new and unique activities in this application as well, which will be the temporary emergency shelter, hazard pay, and landlord incentives. And just a note, in our regular allocations, admin costs were 3.5 or 3.7, but for ESG CV, the maximum request is up to 6% of admin costs. Next slide, please. So here's some of the waivers that came out through the CARES Act from HUD. The first of which is abiding by the fair market rent standards is waived. So you can go above fair market rent so long as it is still considered rent reasonable and it must meet the habitability standards. Housing stability case management, you are not required to meet with a program participant on a monthly basis, which is the typical requirement. It is still encouraged, whether you are doing that safely in person or via electronic video conferencing, telephone call, etc. You do not need to meet with them monthly, but it is still encouraged. And then for participants who reach their 24 months of maximum assistance between the dates of January 21st, 2020 and March 1st, 2021, they are still eligible for an additional 6 months of assistance if that is needed. Next slide, please. So some of the limitations that were put into effect, they redefine kind of what short-term and medium-term rental assistance is. Short-term assistance is up to 3 months of assistance, where medium-term assistance is more than 3 months, but not any more than 12 months. And typically that would be up to 24, but they did change that for the ESG CV contracts. So this is an important thing to note. Emergency shelter funds can only be provided through January 31st of 2022. That applies for both emergency shelter and temporary emergency shelter activities. That came down from HUD. That is applicable for the ESG CV funds. Next slide. So we're going to go into a little bit of the description of the new activities. So temporary emergency shelter is defined as any structure or portion of a structure which is used for a limited period of time because of a crisis, such as a natural disaster or public health emergency, to provide shelter for individuals and families displaced from their normal place of residence or sheltered or unsheltered locations. Next slide, please. So some examples of temporary emergency shelter could be an overnight or daytime or 24-hour shelter, which the program participants are provided a place to sleep, eat, bathe, rest, just receive basic human necessities. A shelter where one or more services are made available on site, either by the shelter staff or if you come out with an MOU with another service provider to provide services on site. Or a shelter that is designated to facilitate the movement of homeless individuals and families into permanent housing within a fixed period of time. So let's say within 12 months, and employs or contracts with one or more case managers and service providers to deliver those services. So under temporary emergency shelter, renovation is permitted if you have a space, let's say in a church room, for example, or an existing space in your shelter that you can expand your services, but just needs a little bit of renovation to get it habitable. That is eligible under temporary emergency shelter. The property's use and disposition will be subject to the real property requirements in that CFR listing under HUD regulations. Next slide. So the two additional new activities that we will have available are landlord incentives for rapid rehousing and homeless prevention activities, as well as hazard pay for all of the activities, street outreach, emergency shelter, rapid rehousing, and homelessness prevention. So for landlord incentives, the funds can be used for paying the costs of landlord incentives as reasonable and necessary to obtain housing for individuals and families experiencing homelessness and at risk of homelessness. But you cannot use the CV2 funds to pay the landlord incentives an amount that exceeds 3 times the monthly rent charged for the unit. So some of these signing bonuses or landlord incentives could be signing bonuses of up to 2 months of rent, security deposits equal to 3 months of rent. You can use them to pay for damages incurred by the program participant that wouldn't be covered by the security deposit or while they're still residing in the unit, and paying the cost for extra cleaning and maintenance of a program's participant's unit or appliances. For hazard pay, this is extra pay for staff working directly to prepare for, and respond to the coronavirus among persons who are homeless or at risk of homelessness. So this could be anyone from doing emergency shelter intake, street outreach teams, emergency shelter maintenance or security staff, staff providing essential services such as outpatient health or mental health, housing navigators, or staff working in proximity with the coronavirus or locations with high likelihood of contracting coronavirus. And then there are some expanded activities such as hotel, motel costs, which are eligible under the shelter operations under emergency shelter. Please note that hotel, motel vouchers are under emergency shelter operations. And these can be utilized when there is no other shelter space available. So you will need to document that there are no shelter space or anywhere to put these clients in shelter safely before you can access or use these hotel motel costs. But these funds can also be used for renting the rooms, cleaning the rooms, and damage done to the rooms as well. And so with that, I'll finish this slide. So hotel motel continued. Expanded population eligible to be served in the hotel motel include literally homeless. If someone is enrolled in a COC or ESG Rapid Rehousing program and they may need to quarantine away from their household, or if they're enrolled in homelessness prevention and need to be enrolled, or again, could be in a permanent supportive housing program and needs to quarantine, they would be eligible to be put in a hotel motel. So I will pass it over to Stacy to continue the rest of the PowerPoint. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Brendan. Continuing on with new application guidelines, homelessness prevention prioritization, universal assessment tools adopted by the COC, prioritize households must at risk of entering the homeless system without the rental assistance, and eliminate programs that operate first come, first serve. These are priorities. Continuing with new application guidelines, increasing equity, access procurement process to engage organizations in service delivery to include smaller community-based organizations and those that serve or are led by people of color. Proposed is to reduce barriers reported by the providers in existing procurement process, including small overall budgets, less access to funding, and less access to government grants, increase the availability of culturally appropriate services and services in areas of need, and ensure services are delivered by organizations best equipped to meet the needs of marginalized populations and communities that have been devastated. And continue slide, please. I'm sorry, I'm having some technical difficulties, and I also see that it's hard to hear. I'll speak a little louder. I hope this is better. And next slide, continue with new guidelines, application guidelines, increasing equity. The site can be found, more information can be found on this site here. HUD Exchange, /resources, documents, home system resource, increasing equity in the homeless response system through expanding procurement, the PDF. So with invoicing, when we start invoicing for these contracts, whoever's approved, they will still be sent to me. You still should submit invoices to me via email to my attention. And again, we are still working on implementing a new electronic invoicing through ESA. I know some of the grantees that already submit invoices to me. I know it's trying a little bit, and some I have to send, you would have to send me several invoices, several emails to cover one invoice. So just please bear with us. We are working on a new, getting a new system electronically through the electronic single application to make it easier for you guys as well as us in DCED. Some of you already know the new reporting requirements for quarterly reports submitted through SAGE by DCED. grantees do not submit reports for you don't have to submit reports for ESG CV, but it's critical that all client data is entered in HMIS in a timely manner. So client data will be collected quarterly through Sage. If you are using HMIS system, if you're using other HMIS system other than the PA HMIS or a comparable database, you'll receive an email quarterly from Sage prompting you to upload your CSV file. And I know there's a next slide. I know there's a report that's out now that's due the first quarter here. Here's a reporting schedule that's due the end of this month. So quarter one is due January 30th. Everyone should have already sent out. We sent out a notification for that, and I know the majority of them have sent them back. If you haven't sent it back, please send the report back by the deadline of January 30th. And we go through 8 quarters with the dates of covering of your submission and the due dates here listed. Next slide, please. And then I'll turn this over to Angela.
Thank you, Stacy. Thank you, Brendan. I realize that we went through all of this fairly quickly, so we'll take some time now to answer any questions that you have. So please, as we mentioned, if you do have questions, put them in the chat. But I wanted to mention this last slide here is our homeless program team. Our contact information, our emails are all up on the screen right now, including our HMIS team. If you do have specific questions about the ESG CV2 application, you can contact myself, Brendan, or Stacy. As you can see, our emails are here. Brendan, do we have any questions?
Yep, and I've been answering them as we go along. Some of the questions.
Sure, can you go ahead and restate those in case people don't have access to the chat?
Yep, so first question that came up is, when will awards be made? I don't think we have an exact date yet, but they'll most likely be sometime in March, with award letters coming out there shortly after. Typically when you get an award letter from DCED, you can start incurring costs, but invoicing cannot be completed until contracts are signed and completed. So yeah, I would say sometime mid to late March, awards will be made. So you can expect them. So Karen asked about program guidelines not being on the single app. The guidelines aren't posted to the single app. They're on DCED's website. I did share the link to her there, but I will also post it in the chat box. There is a link to the guidelines in the chat. Morgan asked, who qualifies for landlord incentives? Is it people at risk? So landlord incentives is really designed for those hardest to house who may have a poor history of housing, and landlords are just not accepting their housing applications or wanting to get them housed. This can be for persons who are literally homeless under rapid rehousing or under homelessness prevention. You can apply for the landlord funds to help those hardest to house get into housing with those landlord incentive costs. Is there anything you want to add on to that?
I do. Thanks, Brendan. I think, in addition to those that might be more difficult to house, we know that, housing inventories are low right now. And so really, if they're eligible for ESG funding through rapid rehousing or homelessness prevention, then you can use the landlord incentive. We want the incentive to be used not only for those that are hardest to house, but also, as a way to help people just get into those units that are so that are few and far between right now, and just to give our participants an edge in getting into those units.
Okay, Kathleen, it's not really a question, but she says having access to HMIS seems to be in conflict with the increasing equity, as most small organizations do not have access to it. If you are a grantee and awarded under this, we give you access to our HMIS system. Now, if you are in an entitlement community, Kathleen, I apologize, I don't know where exactly you're located, but you would have to coordinate with your local COC and HMIS lead agency to get access to input this data into HMIS.
And I just wanted to mention for PA-HMIS, as long as you are participating in the continuum of care, which would be a requirement. It is a requirement to participate in continuum of care if you receive ESG funds and also coordinated entry. But through PA-HMIS, there is no cost for the license and to participate in HMIS.
Thank you. Christy asked, are all participants required to utilize the coordinated entry process? That is, yes, you must utilize coordinated entry. Heather asked, define when no shelter is appropriate. Can you define what is appropriate? And I'll just say, shelter capacities are limited right now. So if their shelters are full, you try to expend every other resource. So maybe you have HAP dollars in your community and they're not able to serve. But mostly when shelters are full in your communities, you're not able to place them in any of those shelter programs. That would be the appropriate time to use the hotel motel vouchers.
I think also we're seeing though too is that if obviously if shelters have had to decrease capacity due to social distancing, that's certainly an appropriate use of hotel motel vouchers as well.
Okay. Tammy asked, can funds be used for operations of shelters, utilities, etc.? Yes, that is an eligible activity under emergency shelter and temporary emergency shelter activities. You can invoice for the operations of the shelters. Angela, this will be one for you. Karen asked, for the first quarter report, who did DCED communicate with? Who got the SAGE links to providers? Schuylkill County did not draw down in 2020, but we sent reports showing intent to reimburse costs through December 2020.
Right, and so I just want to point out that the reporting requirements are very different from annual ESG funding. That grantees do not have the responsibility of uploading the reports. That all lies on DCED. So as long as you receive the email from us requesting your expenditures, and we're just asking that you have all of your data input to HMIS, your client data in HMIS prior to January 15th, because the report is due at the end of this month for the period of October 1st through December 31st, 2020. Now that's if you participate in PA HMIS, that, as long as you've sent us your expenditures and you have to make sure that your client data is in HMIS. If you participate in an HMIS implementation that is not PA HMIS, you have your own implementation, or if you're a victim service provider that has a comparable database, then you would receive link directly to upload your CSV file. If that applies to you, you should have received the links last week. They were sent out. If you have not received the links, again, that's if you're a victim service provider that has a comparable database and does not participate in HMIS, or if you participate in an implementation other than Pennsylvania HMIS and you did not receive the links last week, please reach out to me and let me know. It's possible I may have the incorrect contact person or the incorrect email. So please let me know as soon as possible, and I will be sure to correct that for you and make sure that you get the link to upload your CSV file. Just want to reiterate one more time though, if you participate in PA HMIS, you will not receive links and you do not need to upload CSV files.
Thanks, Angela. So Kathleen said she's in Upper Darby Township. That is not part of the Balanced Estate Continuum of Care. However, if you do not have current HMIS access with your COC, you can request HMIS dollars through your application to cover those costs of an HMIS license should you need it, and you work with your COC to get access to their HMIS system. Okay, John asks, can funds be used to create an external day use public space, city owned, to serve homeless for restrooms, information, assistance, etc.? So yes, one of the temporary emergency shelter activities is like a day shelter, which can be used. I would make sure that there is, like restrooms, showers, hygiene supplies, etc., available there for them to utilize. But yes, under temporary emergency shelter, a day shelter would be eligible. Angela, anything else you want to add?
No, I think you covered it.
Okay. Kaylin asked, we have been receiving phone calls about those who are doubled up due to economic hardship, people moving back in with family members because they lost their housing. Could you elaborate on the eligibility of those situations?
I'll take that one, Brendan. I'm so glad that you asked this question. Those that are doubled up and living with friends or family are eligible for homelessness prevention funds. We know right now that with the eviction moratorium that it's difficult to spend the homelessness prevention funds that are out there right now. And so we are encouraging that if there are individuals or households that are doubled up, to use your homelessness prevention funds. You can use those funds to move them to a new unit. And so that is an eligible cost.
Okay. An anonymous attendee asked if Erie County is within the PA COC bounds of state. That is no. Erie County is a direct entitlement, so you will need to contact your local administrator. I know the HMIS lead agency or HMIS contact there is Lisa Carley. And I believe Peter Burke might also be one of the new contacts. I know the previous contact person I had there, Chrissy, has left. You want to make sure you get in contact with your COC lead agency and HMIS agency there. Tammy asked, being a nonprofit homeless shelter, can we apply for CV on our own, or do we have to go through the county? And are 2 counties okay for regional services used? If you are a shelter and you're providing services on a regional level, yes, 2 counties would make you eligible to apply on a regional basis.
Otherwise, though, if you are a nonprofit that are only serving within 1 county, you would have to reach out to your county commissioners to inquire about applying through the county.
Kaylin asked a follow-up question on the doubled up questions. What type of documentation is needed to justify that they are in need of HP assistance? Does a letter from a family member stating that they are doubled up work, or do they need a date that they have to leave by? So I would say this is you working with the client, maybe getting a self-certification from them stating that they are living with their friends or family due to economic hardship. But you also need to document their income, that they do meet the 30 or 50% AMI, 30% for regular ESG funds, but 50% for ESG CARES dollars. But you would need to get that documentation, as well as I would recommend that you go and review the definition of at risk of homelessness to certify or look at what all is eligible underneath that category. They need to meet that AMI requirement, not have any other supports, et cetera, et cetera. So I would double check that, but definitely a sort of self-certification would work, and you working with the client, you would have that, you would document that information.
And Brendan, I just want to add to that, if the person has to, you want to make sure that that client that is doubled up, if the person whose name is on the lease, if they, he or she can write something up that person has to leave because for whatever reason, we want to have some documentation why this person is being evicted. So if it is they have to leave because the landlord said too many people in the house, or that whatever's not covered on the lease, and they're breaking the lease by allowing this person. So something in writing from the person whose name is on the lease is also needed for that.
Okay, Thank you, Stacy. The anonymous asked, follow up on the Erie County question, would we have to apply through a local agency since we do not fall within the PACOC? Since you're in a direct entitlement agency or entitlement community, I would say yes, unless you are able to prove or show that you can serve on a regional capacity. If you're able to serve more than one, then you could apply. Angela, do you have anything since they are in a entitlement community?
No, I think that covered. I think you answered it, Brendan.
Judith asked, if individuals are doubled up, is it required to complete a VI SPDAT and HMIS to make them eligible for HP funds? They need to go through coordinated entry. You need to do the assessment. So yes, a VI SPDAT would need to be completed, but you have to make sure that they are eligible for HP funds, so that they do have an eviction or a court ordered eviction, depending on when the moratorium lifts. But yes, you would need to make sure that a VI SPDAT is done and that they go through coordinated entry and are entered into HMIS. Lauren asked, follow up to response to Tammy's question, does a shelter who accepts referrals from multiple counties count as a regional project, or is it that the organization has shelters physically in multiple counties? So I would say they can take referrals from multiple counties, but they have to be able to provide services in more than one county. So if they only have one physical location that are accepting referrals, but let's say they're applying on a regional to provide hotel motel vouchers on surrounding counties, that would be an example of an eligible regional project. Angela, do you have anything to follow up with?
Yeah, I think that brings up a good point, though, is that within the guidelines, it does talk about residency requirements, and that providers should not have residency requirements, for example, that you only accept participants from within your county. And so you should be, and according to our guidelines to be in compliance, you should be accepting and not putting any type of residency requirements in place. Again, I'm going to put a plug in here. Please make sure you read the guidelines. There are, with the ESG CV notice that was released September 1st of last year, CPD 2008, that you'll find throughout the guidelines, there are, new and additional requirements. As we mentioned, there's limitations, there's expanded activities. We covered most of them here, but I really encourage you to read our guidelines and read the ESG CV notice. Again, that's CPD 2008, and you'll find throughout the guidelines how to access that.
Okay, Jen asked if we can share the reporting schedule. We'll post the slides with the recording, so you'll be able to see what that reporting schedule is. Angela, if you want to maybe pull up that slide. Thank you.
Done. Mm-hmm.
Yep, so you can take a look at that there. I already answered that question. Lauren, sorry, go ahead.
Can I say one more thing about the reporting? Again, you want to be sure that you're looking out for emails from, most of the time the emails are coming from Stacy Hawthorne. We'll be reaching out to get the information from you on expenditures, and to make sure, as a reminder, what due date we're looking for to make sure that you have all your client data in HMIS. It'll typically be around the middle of the month. Like I said, the deadline is January 15th, because here we have a January 30th deadline. So in the next report for Q2, since the deadline is April 30th, we'll be looking for all that information sometime mid-April. But again, please be sure you're looking out for those emails from Stacy. If you're in PA HMIS, or if you're not, as I mentioned earlier, the link will be directly sent to you sometime around the middle of the month.
Okay, so Lauren asked, since folks can start incurring costs as soon as they are awarded, does that include being able to invoice back to the beginning of the pandemic in January 2020?
Yes, and so invoicing and costs, any costs incurred after January 27th, 2020 are eligible. And that we at DCED had to establish the date that Pennsylvania began responding to and preparing for coronavirus, and that was the date that was established, and we were able to document. You might see a different date throughout HUD's documents. I think they've established nationally it's January 20th of 2020. However, we as a state had to show what our particular date was, which was January 27th.
Okay. Shayna asked, if we partner with HUD, or did you want to add something up? A follow-up, Angela?
No,
sorry, it sounded like you're going to say something. Shayna asked, if we partner with HUD, are we able to apply based on their participation in COC? I'm not sure what you're referring to or what your question is, Shayna. Maybe if you can retype that in a different way. I'm not quite sure what you mean.
It would be helpful for us to know where you're located to help answer that question, I believe.
Okay.
And to who you would have to partner with to apply.
Peter asked, can funds for hotel motel be used to quarantine someone that was a shelter if needed for people exposed to someone with COVID or those from out of state who are required to self-quarantine?
That one gets a little sticky, I think. And just remember that we have to go by that no appropriate shelter space is available. So I think there were a few very specific circumstances there within that question. One that I think would be eligible though is if the person was in shelter and needs to quarantine, that would be appropriate, to provide hotel motel for them. I am not sure that I can speak to people coming from out of state and whether or not that would fall under PEMA category B. I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that, Brendan.
I do not at this time. Maybe we can talk offline about that though, after a little bit more discussion and see what applies or not. Megan asked, is an environmental review still needed? Yes, I believe so. Angela, can you confirm that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Stacy?
Yes. Yes.
And can you talk a little bit, Stacy, about the date on the environmental review and how that plays into everything?
Yes. As someone had mentioned before, if they could go back to when, back to January when virus and everything started, if you are going to be incurring costs back to January, let's use the January 27th date, then the start date of your environmental review should say January 27th. The signature date, the date that your commissioner or whoever has to sign off must match that date. It must match your start date. I know there's a lot of confusion with that, but if you have costs that you're going to incur prior to the date of today or whatever, you want to make sure that the environmental review date, the signature date, must match your contract start date.
Thank you, Stacy. And just to clarify though too, the environmental review form is not something that is required as part of the application. It is something that will be required if and when you're chosen as a grantee.
Okay. Shana just responded and said coordinated entry system, but she is in Cambria, Somerset County. Looks like you work for the Johnstown Housing Authority. So you are able to apply, but if you are awarded, you would need to work with with us to get an HMIS license to be able to enter that data in HMIS and make sure that the persons you are serving do go through coordinated entry. Hope that answers your question. If not, you can send us an email or something. We can talk offline. Melanie asks, if we invoice back to the beginning of the pandemic, how does that affect the ESG CV reports? Would we need to submit an ESG CV report for the initial period and Q1?
No, what would happen is we'd be looking at, probably sometime Q4, we would add you as a new project for Q4. And we would have to provide explanation to HUD when we submit the report as to why you're coming on so late. it's something that we would take care of on our end.
Okay. Jen asked, are we utilizing the ESG CV program in single application for round 2, or will it be a different program like Code Blue?
I'm sorry, can you say that one more time?
Yeah, so when they're going in to apply an ESA or the electronic single application, will it be labeled as ESG CV round 2, or will it be under just the original ESG CV?
I believe the wording is ESG CV.
Okay.
Yes, and I don't think that it specifies round 2, but that should be the only ESG that you're able to apply for right now.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. It'd be the only CV, ESG CV out there, and that will be the one you apply for.
Thank you. So Shana followed up again. If we are partnered with the Johnstown Housing Authority in Cambria County, they use a coordinated entry system. Will that collaboration on this project qualify us to participate in this grant program? As long as you are taking referrals from coordinated entry and you're using HMIS to enter the programs, whether that is you doing it or the housing authority on your behalf, as long as that is that process is happening, you should be okay. But if we need to talk offline to get a better understanding of your program and what you're applying for, we'd be happy to discuss. Kathy Presner asked, do we backdate environmental reviews then?
The answer is yes. Yes, Kathy.
Okay, that's currently, we're caught up on all the questions. We'll give it another minute or two and allow any other questions to come through.
Sure. I think while we're doing that, I just wanted to say that we know there's lots of funding streams and sources out there right now, and with the new CARES relief that or the new relief bill that was signed here recently, there will be additional funding coming through for rent relief. We really, we want you to strategize and think about how ESG funds will best fit into your community, knowing all the resources that are available. So we'll be looking for, we really want you to strategize on that. And in addition, with the increasing equity, you'll see in the guidelines that we will be prioritizing those applicants that are able to identify subrecipients who are either led by people of color, that are primarily serving Black, Indigenous people of color, or those that have been historically underserved or poorly served. And so just to be aware of that, I encourage you to take a look at the link that we shared for more information on how you can, step by step, on how you can try to identify subrecipients that might meet that criteria.
Yep, so Heather asked, PHFA CARES rent relief program is having another round. Yes, it was basically extended to continue expending those funds, I believe.
So yes, if the estimations are correct from what we're hearing, Pennsylvania will be receiving around 800 million in rent relief. Now, it's still, there's still discussions on how that will be administered. It's not definite that it's going to be PHFA. There's still discussions on how those funds will be administered throughout the state.
Yep, more information to come. And I just want to add another thing that wasn't in the slides, but if you participate on HUD's office hours calls, last week they do it every Friday, but last week they really started talking about vaccination and how to coordinate vaccinations with your communities. And they did share that some of these ESG CV funds can be used to help coordinate vaccination events, essentially. We didn't include that in the slides because I didn't get all the information from HUD at this point, but be on the lookout for that information. Basically, you can use emergency shelter dollars to host vaccination events at certain locations. You can use street outreach dollars to transport people. So there's a couple different eligible activities under those street outreach and emergency shelter activities to help coordinate with vaccination events. So be on the lookout for that information to come out from HUD.
Yeah, and also, you know, Brendan mentioned HUD's office hours. I encourage you to participate in those every Friday afternoon. There's always lots of good information and opportunities for Q&A. And also, if you aren't signed up to receive notices from the HUD Exchange, I encourage you to do that. It's another way to stay linked in.
And Megan asked, do we know if the state will be adding requirements or utilizing the federal guidelines for the stimulus dollars? I don't think there's any certainty as to what's happening at this point, still in the early planning stages.
I will say, though, that with this bill and this time around, the requirements and guidelines aren't as stringent coming down from the federal government. So we're hoping that that won't be a barrier to getting the funds out to the households that need it, as we saw the last time. I think there was just there were too many guidelines, and it made it impossible for people to qualify. So the good news is that those have been lifted this time around, and so we're hoping it'll be easier to get the funds out. But yeah, again, we don't know yet, so stay tuned. It's coming very soon, though. So we'll know fairly soon.
Kathy asked, do you anticipate any ESG policy guideline changes to allow more flexibility and assistance? The moratorium makes it much harder to assist with HP funds, and when it's lifted, many people owe much more than 6 months in arrearages.
Yeah, unfortunately, HUD's guidance, it is what it is right now. And they're actually, HUD's guidance is saying we shouldn't be providing rental assistance during the eviction moratorium. They consider the eviction moratorium as a resource, and that we shouldn't actually be providing any type of rental assistance for those who have fallen behind in their rent. Now, we at DCED are allowing that if they have. We know that there's courts out there that aren't abiding by the moratorium and the CDC eviction moratorium and declaration. And so, we have taken it a step farther that at DCED, we are allowing that if the household has a court-ordered eviction, that you can provide the assistance. But at this time, during the eviction moratorium, that's the only way that the costs will be eligible. And that's nothing, that's coming from HUD right now. So that's, we don't have much flexibility there, unfortunately.
And Angela, I don't know if you want to include anything else about the 14 or 21 days, if you want to mention that at all.
Yeah, so those of you that have ESG funding right now, who have homelessness prevention funding, with the eviction moratorium set to expire the end of this month, as of now, households can appropriately meet the definition of being at risk because it falls within the 21 days of them losing housing. So right now, and until and indefinitely, or until if there's another eviction moratorium that's put into place, you are able to provide the assistance to households with only a written notice written notice from the landlord. Right now, you don't need a court order, but again, you have to stay tuned in and know what's happening with the eviction moratorium. That we need to stay tuned in if anything's extended there. So, good point, Brendan. Prior to this, it was you do need a court-ordered eviction, but right now, because the moratorium is set to end, people can meet the at-risk definition. You don't need a court order; you just need a written notice from the landlord.
And I will just add on to that you should still continue to try to work with the landlord to set up a payment plan, or make sure that the household does or does not qualify for the CDC moratorium before you move forward and use ESG. That should be kind of like the last step in that process of providing HP. Oh, and also connecting the legal aid since this is a legal moratorium ruling. So make sure you're connecting them as well. So Kathy asked, pet owners are hard to place. Can landlord incentives be used for those with pets?
I think absolutely, because you can provide up to 3 months. So yeah, I don't see why not.
Yeah, so instead of like a security deposit, it's almost like a pet deposit almost. So I would say if you're able to get a landlord to assist with that, absolutely. Keisha says that is if they are being evicted by February 1st, 2021 for the moratorium in HP.
Right. Well, yes. If they've received a written notice from their landlord anytime after the 10th of January, they're eligible right now.
Okay, we have a couple minutes left before 11. We're all caught up on questions again. So we'll just give it another minute or two, allow for any other final questions to come through. If you have anything after the webinar, feel free to contact any one of us at DCED. We'll be happy to assist. And again, this recording and the PowerPoint will be posted for review. Peter asked, can the funds be used to supplement other rental assistance programs? It depends on what kind of programs there are, because if they are federal resources, you can't cross subsidies. So it depends on what the resource is, I would say.
That's correct. We have to be careful about duplication of benefits. Now, I can say though, with the rent relief that we've been talking about that's coming down soon, it can be combined with ESG, but you have to carefully combine it. Like if you use the rental assistance funds from the state for January, and they owe for February as well, you could use then ESG for February. So you just have to be careful about how you're combining those funds. And I do want to mention that ESG funds cannot be used if the household's already receiving a rental subsidy.
Kaylin asked, are we able to assist even with the moratorium as long as they have a written eviction from the landlord after the 10th?
That's right. Yep. But again, keep your eye out, because as soon as if we get word that another moratorium has been put into effect, then we go right back to requiring the court order.
Lauren asked, are you prioritizing rapid rehousing over HP since we have a lot of folks on the coordinated entry by name list without adequate rapid rehousing to meet their needs? So
that's a tough one to answer, because yes, I think, we haven't prioritized it within our guidelines, but recognizing that we need to be focusing on moving people who are literally homeless and moving people who are in congregate and non-congregate shelter into housing. Rapid rehousing is certainly an activity that I would encourage applicants to look at and apply for, as opposed to homelessness prevention. Knowing that homelessness prevention funds will be coming through the state, and we have quite a bit of homelessness prevention funds out there with ESG CV round 1 as well. So
Kaylin followed up and said, would we have to repay anything paid from now until the end of the month if the moratorium gets pushed again? No. If that date is, sorry, Angela, your face lit up, so I'll let you answer that.
No, go ahead.
I'd say no. I mean, until we know for certain if the moratorium is extended or not, anything from now until that moratorium is put into effect, should there be another one, you will not have to repay anything.
And just know, I know it's cumbersome, but when you're invoicing, we ask for lots of documents, and especially with homelessness prevention right now, Stacy's going through those invoices with the fine-tooth comb to make sure that yes, they are eligible. So, and we're trying to be flexible where we can. But Brendan, I think you answered that question well.
Megan asked, can we use ESG for the security deposit for someone going into subsidized housing since there is no subsidy for security deposit? That is correct. Yeah, you can
Yes.
use ESG for the security deposit if they get a housing voucher for whatever program. Yeah. Okay. I think that's everything. We're 2 minutes after 11. Angela, do you want to wrap up or leave it open a couple more minutes?
I think we'll leave it open one more minute. I think this is a good opportunity for people to ask questions. So maybe just one more minute.
Beth asked, I missed the beginning of the meeting. Can you explain appropriate use for hotel vouchers with congregate shelters? So if you're using emergency shelter dollars for hotel motel vouchers, you have to make sure you're going through every resource available in your community. So if all your shelters are full, there's no other HAP dollars or anything to assist the person get into housing, you can use ESG to put them into hotel motel. But that is again, that there are no available shelter space and you did check other resources before resulting to using the ESG assistance. Can we use landlord incentives to house people coming from institutions? That depends on whether they meet the criteria or not, though, of were they in there for 90 days or less, or 120 days. Now, I don't know if that waiver is still in effect. I think it is. It would be 120 days for ESG or COC funds. Do you have anything else to add to that?
Yeah, so I guess getting to your point about, first regarding the waivers, anything that was in the ESG CV notice, CPD 2008 that was released September 1st, those limitations, waivers, and flexibilities will be available and in effect until September of 2022. And so they did through that, they changed the length of time that a person is institutionalized to be eligible from 90 days to 120 days. But again, as Brendan said, yes, you can use landlord incentives as long as they meet eligibility requirements as a participant.
Could you post a link to the waivers? I don't know if you have that quickly on hand, Angela. That was one thing that Kaylin asked.
You can Google CPD 20-08.
All right. All right, that's everything that's come through up until this point.
All right, I think we'll wrap up then today. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Again, I know we've said it several times, but please, if you have additional questions, we're here to help. Reach out to any of us with any questions you have, or if you'd like to set up a meeting to discuss further, we're happy to do that. Again, thanks for joining us. I hope you have a great rest of the day. Bye now.
Take care, all.